Questionable Ethics, Chapter 6, Universal Gravitation. You know, after the whole Black Mesa incident, and me being trapped here for roughly 3 days, my muscles and physical body really got a run for their money. I mean, I sure as hell ran a damn good marathon while I was trapped there. I beat the ever-living shit out of everything I crossed paths with me. I shot twice my weight in ammunition with every weapon in the HECU arsenal, and then some. It helped that I spent most of my time in Black Mesa climbing ladders, swimming with only a few hours of sleep, ripped fuel, adrenaline, and morphine to keep me awake. Judging by the tight burn in my muscles, and feeling like I weighed as much as a feather, carrying 2 weapons and a full kit, I'd say it was a pretty good workout. Then again, there's always room for improvement. I also don't recall eating anything, at all, for something like 72 whole hours. Hell, not even a chocolate bar. Not such a bad thing, though, because I still had my uneaten MREs. Regardless of all that, I felt different. I felt stronger. Something that I welcomed with open arms. Maybe it was some sort of placebo, but I felt better than I had in years. Especially that moment ascending that mountain like it was nobody's business. "Adrian, wait up!" Autumn Blaze's voice echoed against the mountain's face behind me. I suspended my rucking and peeked over my shoulder, getting a firm grip on a rock to steady myself. Sure enough, there she was, coming up the rear. "Gosh, are you sure you're not part mountain goat or something? I don't remember the humans in the legends being this quick on their hooves, or, feet, I guess," she shouted as she jumped from rock to rock, quickly climbing after me. I laughed for a brief moment. "Well, I'm not your average human. I'm a United States Marine. I eat terrain like this for breakfast," I called back as I basked in the distance I had put between us. "Well, if that's true, then let your food digest a bit, will ya? I need to keep an eye on you, and I can't when you're like this, all the way up there," Autumn said as she scrambled up the rock face with an elegance of a billy goat, closing the distance as best she could. Imagine Rainshine's shock if she found out the human tripped and fell off a mountain while I was watching him. She'd have my head, or worse. I don't even want to think about it," Autumn exclaimed as her eyes flickered down towards the village under us for a brief moment, before looking back to me with a look of concentration. I nodded my head in understanding and let out a sigh. All right, I'll take it easy." I sat down on a section of rock that jutted out from the mountain face. The side of the mountain I decided to climb up was rather steep, but not too steep or sharp of an incline. That you could call it rock climbing per se. It was a pleasantly difficult challenge to work around, one I accepted with optimism, and one that I was crushing with my stubborn refusal to turn back. I had passed the tree line a while ago, and the wind was plentiful this high up. It felt great as I sat on that rock, taking it easy. It was there that I could really take in the entirety of that village below us. This place was something out of a storybook. So perfect and picturesque. The colors, the abundance of overflowing life, the way the air just smelled so fresh and clean. It was truly gorgeous in a way that it couldn't be described properly in words. You just have to see it for yourself in order to believe. You know, Autumn, I think you're right about me digesting the environment around here. This valley you Kieran have is very beautiful. I never really considered myself a wildlife conservativist or a Greenpeace kind of dude, but I love the way this place looks. I mean, it's just astonishing, I complimented, projecting my voice down to Autumn, who was now getting to my ridgeline. I heard her grunt in her voice, as the sound of rolling, fragmented rocks could be heard next to me. Her hoof popped over the ledge I sat upon as I looked over to see if she was here. As soon as I saw it, I instinctively got up to help her, but she beat me to it, popping herself over the rock, no problem. Autumn exhaled and put her glasses back on before dusting herself off. She then faced out to the landscape below. That I was surveying. She grinned and turned to me. I've lived here my whole life. I've just gotten used to looking at it. The forests, the flowers, the mountains, and the wide open skies. But every now and again, I look over the valley and just sit there in astonishment at the beauty of it all, while realizing just how small I really am. She'd cocked a brow and turned to me. You really think so? You too think this place is forever expanding and infinite with its splendor, as if the everything knows you're looking at it? It tries its darndest to look its best for you? I responded to her, nodding my head and sweeping my arm out to the valley below. Of course. I know people who'd kill for a view like this. Autumn winced at my compliment as an awkward air of silence surrounded us. It took me a second to realize why. I then backpedaled and rephrased it as best as I could. I mean, I don't know anybody who would actually do that. It's a figure of speech back home. Autumn looked at me with an apprehensive gaze before nodding slowly, her ears flicking in my direction. Right. Well, I'm nonetheless flattered that you think that about our valley that way. I could sort of tell you were an outdoors kind of character by the way you refused all of Rainshine's offers to sleep indoors, she mused, sitting down onto her haunches as she looked up at me. I looked down to her and leaned back against the rock face as I crossed my leg over the other, getting just a bit more comfortable while I enjoyed the sights. I didn't sleep in a tent because I like the outdoors, even though I do. I slept outside because it's not right for me to take up a space in your village. I have doctrines to follow, I replied with honesty to her. Autumn looked back to me and tilted her head slightly, her eyes squinting in confusion. What do you mean? Autumn asked. I mused briefly on how I could explain my reasoning to her. There was probably an easier way of doing it, but I decided to explain it by the book, as to help her better understand. Well, it's kind of hard for me to put it into my own words, so here, let me just show you. I leaned over and pulled my rucksack into my lap in a swift practice motion. I opened the main flap and reached deep into the bag, fishing around for a moment. I found a worn, thick pamphlet and pulled it out. On the cover of the tiny booklet was a picture of George Washington, holding a feather and quill, and next to him was the United States Constitution. Beneath him, in golden letters, read the words, "My Pocket Constitution." I opened it with Autumn watching over my shoulder. Her gaze was that of confusion as she watched me flip through its worn pages. What is a constitution? She asked, her upper body leaning over towards me as she twisted her head to look at the covers of the booklet. With a confused look on her face, while I was a bit confused on how she had never heard of the term before, I was more than willing to explain. A constitution is a fundamental list of principles in which a government is acknowledged to be governed by. Basically, it's a guideline on how a government should be running itself. Constitutions are usually agreed upon by not only the individuals running the government, but by the people they stand for and represent, or at least they should be. The definition I gave to her was crammed into her noggin as she looked over the printed example of word on the cover of the booklet. Her eyes squinted as she thought about what I said. Could you explain that to me one more time? I think I understand it, but at the same time, you sort of lost me. Sorry. She dryly laughed in a sheepish manner. I cleared my throat and said what I said again, this time a bit slower and less wordy than before, so it was better for her to understand. Then I tried to make it sound like I wasn't talking down to her, but I don't like explaining things a second time. In my line of work, you either get what someone is telling you, or you'll miss some key information and probably die before you can ask them to clarify. It's just how things are where I come from. After she wrote down what I was trying to tell her, she nodded, taking off her glasses and looking over to me again, with her fullest attention. All right, I think I got it. So it's like a recipe for success in written form for a country to follow, right? I nodded. She smiled. Ah, okay, good. Yeah, that makes more sense. I'm glad I got that, but, She puts her glasses back on, reading over what she wrote before, looking back to me. What does this have to do with you sleeping outside? She said, again, looking mighty confused. I finally was able to flip to the right page in the booklet. I jabbed my finger to the text and began to read. The Third Amendment of the Bill of Rights, which is part of the original legal framework of the United States of America, states, I quote, "No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house until the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law," I proclaimed. Placing my thumb on the page to keep it open, led my eyes back to her. She was still visibly confused. I'm sorry, I don't understand. She sounded lost in the cryptic terminology used by my forefathers. I sighed and closed the book, keeping my thumb on the page to keep it ready just in case she had more questions. It means I'm not allowed to live in a house whose owners don't want me there during a time of peace. The Kirin of your village are afraid of me. Sending me to go live in their homes would be violating my nation's constitution. I am a kind of soldier, after all. I tried to explain. She still seemed a bit confused. She understood what I was saying, and I felt as though she had come to terms with what I was, but she just didn't understand what I meant, and probably this rule was so strangely worded on paper. But this isn't America. This is Equestria. Surely you don't need to follow those rules everywhere you go, right? I mean, it just doesn't sound fair. I mean, I may not really know that much about soldier life, but surely you'd want a nice bed to sleep in, right? I shook my head at her misimportation. Yes, I do, but not if it means taking away from someone else. I took a pledge to follow my nation's constitution at all times, and abide by the rules it lays out everywhere I go. Surely these texts were written over 200 years ago, and sure, the wording is a bit old and strange sounding, and sure, people may take advantage of the phraseology to get more than they deserve, but not me, and neither should other Marine for that matter. I interpret it the way my forefathers intended, the right way, the true American way. I looked off towards the valley below us, as I thought about yesterday. Me being around you, Kieran, and away from home is different. Just because I'm not surrounded by my peers anymore doesn't mean I should just throw away all I've fought to uphold. I believe in my principles. I shouldn't be given any privileges that I haven't earned yet, nor would I accept them, even if I were given them at all, I said with finality, looking back towards Autumn. Her eyes were looking down to the booklet instead of me. Something about it must have interested her. Maybe it was the way I had explained it, or perhaps she was just yearning to learn more. When she felt my eyes looking at her, she jolted back up to meet my gaze, before sighing and looking to the village. Gosh, that is one noble way of looking at life. Then again, I'm not in any position to say what you're doing or saying is right or wrong, because, trust me, I'm no expert on the matter. She says, looking jokingly before her demeanor turned to that of concern. But from a certain standpoint, somebody might take what you're doing to be a bit rude. I don't, of course, now that you've explained it to me, why you do what you do, but they might, she pointed out, raising an eyebrow towards me, as if expecting me to have a response. I didn't keep her waiting long. If they thought that way, then they're thinking too hard, I replied bluntly, with a bit of harshness in my voice. This remark caught her off guard. I caught myself just now being a bit protective of my ideals, and rightly so. But I tried to cover this up as best as I could. Plus, the Kieran down there are afraid of me. I'm sure my current living conditions suit their taste quite nicely. She banks her head from side to side as she weighed in what I said. Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, I don't think you're scary, but you already know that, Autumn says with a gentle wave of her hoof. I just wish my friends were as openly welcome of outsiders as, I am. And don't, what's that saying? Judge a book by its cover, she said, with a bright, wide smile. I gently chuckle and nod in agreement before I sigh. There was a moment of silence as we drank in the beauty of the valley together, while listening to the sounds of nature. But it didn't last forever. Autumn let out a grunt and stood up. Well, the morning is burning away. Want to keep climbing, Corporal? She asked, trotting up towards the nearest trail that was available to her. I jumped up from my seat on the rock and smiled at her optimism to keep moving forward. Of course, we're Oscar Mike, I said in my colloquial military tongue. Her eyebrow quickly arched up, and she looked back to me real quick, with that confused look on her face again. We're who? She asked as she began to climb ahead of me. I realized my mistake and backtracked again. No, it's military speak. Oscar Mike means on the move. It's, the military phonetic alphabet. It shortens certain phrases to make them easier to say so you can move quicker and think faster. Of course, to you, I'm speaking gibberish. Right? I answered as I mantled the cliff face after her. She snickered and nodded in muted agreement. Heh, yeah, sorry, she admitted with a slightly embarrassed tone. I quickly reassertified this. Hey, no need to say sorry. If you don't get it, you don't get it. Maybe if we hang out a bunch and talk more often, you'll pick up on some of it. I encouraged, almost like an invitation for her. She quickly responds excitedly. Of course, I'd like that a lot. I mean, you're still like the first human I've ever met. I still have so many questions I have yet to ask you. And there's just so much you could teach me about what it's like to be a human. But before we do any of that, I have a strange request from you. If you wouldn't mind, she asks curiously. As she continues to climb. And what's that? I asked, following her in her wake, as to not upset the rocks. Could you read me the rest of what's in that book? This Constitution and whatever the other thing was sounds super interesting. And if I understood it, then maybe I can understand you and learn about humans easier. She politely asked, turning back to look at me for a moment, and with an almost begging grin across her face. I nodded my head and smiled brightly as at her curiosity. Ha! Yeah, sure, I can read it to you. You can read it yourself as well if you'd like. A few rocks cracked and tumbled as I climbed up towards her. Let's just get to and we can start making a dent in it, I replied, surprising myself with the cheery tone I had adopted. For some reason, this made me enthusiastic. She wanted to learn how America worked. Shit, this Kieran may be more than what she was letting on after all. I grunted as we continued up the mountain. Well, why do you want to learn more about my nation's constitution all of a sudden? I asked. I think I just wanted to hear what she had in mind. She furrowed her brow a moment as she considered her reply. I don't know. It just sounds interesting, that's all, she eventually said. I shrugged as I pulled myself up to another rock. It just sounds interesting. That's it? I asked, reiterating what I said as I watched her tail as it swung back and forth in front of me. There was a pause before she answered. Well, you said that the rule that prevents you from sleeping in another pony's beds was the fourth one or something in the Book of Bills? It's the third one, and it's called the Bill of Rights. Yes, I said, correcting her. Yeah, that. Well, I want to know what the other rules are like. How many rules are there in this bill? She asks after she jumps up onto a rock ledge that could fit her 4 hooves. There's 10, I stated as I followed. 10? Jeez, that's a lot of rules, she said, looking down at me, shocked. I shrugged in response. It could be worse. I'm sure there are constitutions from my home world that have more. She considered it before giving a nod. I guess you're right. How many other countries are there in your world? I exhaled hard as I thought about her words. Okay, now that is a hard question to answer. Not only is that a controversial topic, I don't actually know. She squinted before climbing up higher, now that I and her were together again. What? So, are there a lot of them? Yes, hundreds of them, being in different sizes and shapes, with different amounts of people, and different cultures, as with separated languages, that I can't even begin to touch on. Autumn looked at me again, her head popping out from behind a stone ledge. Yeesh, your world sounds complex. I mean, I already figured out that stuff you're wearing and the stuff you brought with you, but, man, that place sounds huge, bigger than anything I've seen here. She complimented, at least I thought it was a compliment. Yeah, it sure is something, I said as I grabbed a rock near where she popped out at. The rest of the journey upwards was quiet. I guess she just wanted to focus on climbing and me not falling. Maybe she just wanted to save the real spiel for when we got to solid ground. It didn't matter much regardless. I was just glad to see she was willing to go to great lengths to keep up with me. That dedication of hers was something that I found very impressive. Plus, something told me I was only scratching the surface of it. If I was, if I was excited to see more of it. Well, that was that chapter, and dang, I yeah, it was not that bad. I actually kind of enjoyed the talking parts, conversational, and all that. Uh, Actually, fun fact about the countries is, or fun fact about PayPal is, they service over 200 countries, even though that there's only like 195 to 198, but it is what it is. I just found that fact out, I believe today or yesterday. It was at some point, I can't remember, but yeah, there's that. I can't remember if I said this in one of my other videos or not, but yeah, sorry that I don't have a really good female voice. My voice is too low for that, but I try, and it is what it is, but yeah, at least I had something different to talk about this time. Well, I hope you'd enjoyed this chapter. That's kind of all I got, and I guess stay golden and have a good afternoon or night, or even morning.